Okay, so I think people are now joining us and should be able to hear us. Um, we've got about 50 people signed up, so we're just going to give it a minute for people to actually join before we kick off. This is quite strange using it. We were just saying it's our first time using the webinar setup, so it's quite strange that you're not all joining with faces that we can see. We can't see you, so we'll just have to wait for people to join. So we'll just give it a minute or so, and then we will kick off. We are recording this session as well, so we'll see if we're able to make it available via our website when we've finished. Okay, so we're at a couple of minutes past, so I think I'll make a start to make sure that we can cover everything within the time. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I think I know everyone who's joined. My name's Liz. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Fostering Network. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about the format for today, and then we'll make a start on the presentation. So I'm going to be introducing our report, Listening to Foster Carers, explaining the process that we use to undertake these exit interviews, and then sharing our key findings and recommendations. Then we'll hear from Jasmine Thorne, who actually conducted the interviews with the foster carers. And we have Carla Perry joining us from Caerphilly Fostering Service, and she'll talk to us about her response to the report and share her thoughts on what she thinks of the findings. You can ask questions throughout using the Q&A box. We'll come to those at the end. And we also have Gina, our admin officer, joining us. She's under the name Practice Development on the screen, and she's helping us with the technology. So just to give a bit of context before we move on to the findings about why we started this project. It's part of our Welsh Government funded Fostering Communities programme. So that's been in place, that's been funded since 2019. When we had a regional pilot of an advice and mediation service, and when that finished, we wanted to look at something we could deliver Wales-wide using the team that we already had. Jasmine, who was the A&M worker, highlighted that exit interviews was something that she'd been considering offering. She felt an independent interview would really be beneficial in finding out the reasons why foster carers were leaving their service. We had discussions with various stakeholders, and that really did show us that using interviews as a vehicle to sort of research retention and identify why foster carers were leaving their service would be beneficial. So moving on from that, all local authorities across Wales and the independent services were offered the opportunity to take part in an exit interview. 11 local authorities and 3 of the independents took part. The referrals happened once the foster carers, the termination of approval had been confirmed at panel for those foster carers. Jasmine then conducted the interviews using the same set of questions for every person. And then the results were collated and they were analysed by our policy officer, Tamsin Cavell. We've shared snapshots of our findings throughout the project. So we've at regular intervals at our team managers forum, we've given some highlights of what we found out so far. And then in March 2025, we held focus groups with fostering services and foster carers to get their response to our initial findings and to gain a bit of an insight about what would be most useful to report on, and then to gather some practice recommendations. So before I share our key findings, I just want to acknowledge that this is very much one side of the story. It's the foster carers' experience in their own words. One of the concerns that was voiced by services right at the start of this process was that it maybe wouldn't accurately capture the events that led to a foster carer leaving their service. We do know that there'll be instances within this data where the foster carer ending their journey was the right thing to do, and that was maybe managed by services as the best outcome for everyone. But by collating all of those experiences together and providing a bank of data, we hope we can provide some really useful insight. So I'll speak more about it as I go through the presentation, but we've been very intentional in our language. So using terms like perceived lack of support, where participants have said they didn't feel supported. We don't know what was offered by their service and maybe not taken up. We don't know what offers were made. And we don't know if there are cases where communications from the foster carers themselves weren't very clear. So we just wanted to recognise that we've taken that into account, but presented the foster carers' experiences as they told them to us. Some of the quotes in the report are quite hard-hitting. Participants were often recounting experiences that had been very difficult for them and they'd clearly been emotionally affected by. These quotes are included in the report to illustrate the strength of feeling and to really show that this is the foster carers' experience from their perspective. So with that caveat in mind, we hope this information can be relevant and very useful to you when considering retention of foster carers across Wales. So this is our report, Listening to Foster Carers, Why They Leave and How We Can Support Retention. The report's available in English and Welsh. I'm going to present the slides in English only going on from here because there are a lot of tables with information that would be quite, I know people are watching it on smaller laptop screens, that'd be quite difficult to see. So just trying to balance the language requirements and the access there. So I hope that's okay. You'll have all of the graphs and information in both languages in the final report. So the participants, 112 completed interviews with foster carers from across Wales. 79% of those were leaving local authority services and 21% independents. 50% were leaving within 5 years of approval and 6% within 1 year. 32% were choosing to foster due to previous professional experience. So some things to note here, we were asked by referring authorities if we could break down these results by local authority or separate the local authority data from the independents. The numbers were a bit too low to do that without them becoming clearly identifiable. You would have known who those foster carers were, and we did this as an anonymous process. And in terms of further splits of the data, there are lots of ways that we could do that split, and we had to be mindful that we're a small team who aren't trained researchers. But with that in mind, we felt, and this was really supported by the focus groups, that the most important thing to do was capture the specific reasons for those leaving within 5 years of approval. In many cases, there was no significant difference to the overall cohort, but when there was, we've shown that, and there's a further breakdown in the report of how long the 112 respondents had been fostering. This is a breakdown of the age of the people who took part. When you see this alongside the information on how long people had been fostering, it's really clear that there's only a small group here who would be considered as retiring from fostering. So that's the first indication that really we are speaking here about households who would have been expected to continue and continue to contribute to this service for longer. So if we move on to our key findings, 80% would recommend fostering to others and 57% said they would consider fostering again. 42% left due to a perceived lack of support, but that rises to 50% to those leaving within their first 5 years. Over half said their service could have done something differently to enable them to carry on, and 23% felt they were not appropriately matched to the children in their care. It's obviously really encouraging that despite everything that has happened, and we read through some quite difficult testimony from these people, that 80% would still recommend fostering to others. They remain very committed to fostering as something that is important. In terms of the lack of support and the opportunity for services to act differently or the impact of matching, we'll go on to that in a bit more detail later on in the presentation. So the impact on babies, children and young people obviously is something that's really important to capture as part of this. 48% felt that the termination of approval had been an unplanned process. For 51%, that termination of approval did not result in children being moved. And actually, that doesn't mean that for 49% it did result in children being moved. The remaining 49% reported a variety of circumstances. So that includes return to birth family, when I'm ready, moving with the foster carers to a new service. So in fact, just 13% said that children were moved to a new foster family as a result of this. I think there could be more research to do here about the impact of ends in foster approval to provide something like When I'm Ready, and whether those foster carers would then go back through the approval process and rejoin their fostering service when that young person has left their home. That's posing a question here, but are we losing foster carers in Wales as a result of the way that policy is implemented? Something that we can't cover in detail here, but it supports what we've claimed as called for as a charity, which is that fostering approval be extended to children up to 25 so that they can still stay on a When I'm Ready placement with approved foster carers, and that would just help that retention piece. So something for another day, perhaps. So here are our top reasons for leaving that we found. So in order: perceived lack of support, personal circumstances, matching, being told to leave, not feeling valued, placement breakdown, and a move in services. So we'll look at these in some detail now. Support as a topic is something we really look at in detail through the report because it was the thing that came up the most through all the interviews. For this piece of data, we asked them what support network was in place, and just 31% had a significant adult approved alongside to support them. And you can see a quote there from us, which is that for resilient fostering families, every foster carer should have access to a support network, and that being formally identified is really important. You can see there's quite a high number there that it is informal support, which is obviously very important. But for this to be really robust, then we would advise that there's an approved significant adult. 26% had personal circumstances that led to them leave fostering. So some of these were unavoidable, and the fact that it ended their fostering journey was completely out of the control of the fostering service. So demands of birth children, caring for elderly relatives, moving to a house that doesn't have a spare bedroom, so obviously they can't foster anymore. But there were instances where individuals had asked for a break or a pause to deal with personal circumstances, and this wasn't granted or it wasn't made easy for them. And so they made a very difficult decision to stop fostering at that point. And 13% said they would have continued if their service had allowed them to take an extended break to manage those personal circumstances. A smaller number, but significant, 8% said they would have continued if regular short breaks had been provided. There are lots of things that are really difficult to capture within a data set, but I do know from many conversations with Jasmine that these carers were not asking for short breaks that were unplanned or difficult for the children. What they wanted were planned and well-managed breaks with people known to the children. It was definitely commented on that it would add to their stress if they knew children were spending time with people they didn't know and it was distressing them. But the overarching argument was we need short breaks to recover and recuperate, and not having those was directly something that helped them make that decision to move on from fostering. But there were positives. 41% said support was something their service did well, and 23% felt their service provided a good training offer, which resulted in them feeling really prepared for the role. So obviously we've pulled out quotes and information on where they felt support didn't meet their needs, because that's the thing we're looking at here, but there were really positives there. We move on to matching, which was the most important. It was the third most popular reason. There were some really positive experiences reported where matching had been very strong. We asked them to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how well children were matched to their family and skill set, with 10 being very well matched. And you can see there it's a real scattergun across the numbers, with some half numbers creeping in. It was really difficult because some people had fostered a lot of different children, so they would say 10 for the most recent child, but they could also think of instances where it had been lower. There were respondents who said 1 or 0 because they didn't feel they could see a matching process happening. They knew services were responding to emergencies under pressure. And in a few cases, people were leaving as they had never had a child placed with them. So they've either said 0 or not applicable. They hadn't experienced that process at all. Communication is a really broad theme. So in this presentation, I've grouped some of this together. This is all explored in more depth in the report. 23% said their service or felt their service could have been better at listening to them. 21% said feeling more valued could have changed their decision to leave. 13% said they were told to leave, and this increases to 21% for those within 5 years. This is a really interesting one. We know from the focus groups that services felt quite strongly that this doesn't really happen. They don't tell foster carers to leave. We do know that a small portion of this number was supported to move to a different service due to geography and being supported better somewhere else. And so they were told to leave, and that accounts for some of those, but not everybody. Again, it was that asking for a break or a pause that came up. This was requested, not given, and foster carers being or felt that they were being told, well, if you're not going to accept a placement, then you should leave. And that was some of the people within that number. So now we'll have a look at our recommendations. We've identified these following some real careful consideration of everything we've learned through this process. As I've just said, flexibility and listening to requests for breaks came up time and time again. That's one of the key things I remember Jasmine telling me when she started these interviews, that that was what people were telling her, that was what was resonated with her. It's really complex, and it's clearly we can see the complexity from doing this process. We know that services have reported feeling pressured and not able to have what are considered vacancies. So is this a case of empowering supervising social workers to make the case and recommend a break for their carers, and asking managers to recognise the importance of this to retain fostering households in the longer term? This is potentially and quite probably due to a lack of sufficiency. We know the numbers of children needing fostering placements has risen. Support networks are clearly crucial. That approved support person who can provide short breaks and just general support and someone to lean on and someone to help at those difficult times if there are pressures in caring for other members of the family. Could those carers who have a change in circumstance and can't take a placement full time, could they be these people? That's just posing a question, but it's something that we talked about a lot through this process. There are people there who maybe could be utilised in different ways. A programme run by us, Mockingbird, provides the community, the support, and the short breaks all wrapped up in one programme. We also have Fostering Wellbeing and the Pioneers, who can be utilised to support new carers or just those that are experiencing difficulties. 21 of our 22 local authorities are working with us to develop their pioneer groups, and I think this is something that we should work collaboratively on to really make sure we're responding to this report. And also availability of social workers, and you'll see that in the report, both in terms of supervising social workers and the childcare team. Sometimes they just picked up the phone and felt there weren't people getting back to them, and that's clearly something that has affected them in making the decision. Consistency across Wales is really important in terms of matching, support and training. It came up again in the focus groups about ensuring that there were consistent policies and procedures across Wales. There's good practice guidance from AFCA, which gives matching processes that can be used universally, but we weren't clear from that process of speaking to people whether those were being used universally. The Register for Foster Carers is something that we've campaigned on for a long time as an organisation. This would allow that portability, so those carers who pause or stop and then want to restart their journey can more easily do so without the burden of going right back to the beginning of their approvals process. It could also support matching by giving a more transparent Wales-wide picture, and those carers that were identified as being felt they hadn't really been used in the time they were approved, that they could be more visible if that register was in place. I think the most important thing that has come out of this is that open and honest communication with foster carers. We'll hear from Jasmine shortly, and some of her reflections will really illustrate that a bit further. I've read all the transcripts behind this data, and I can see lots and lots of examples of people who were just a bit overwhelmed by a system that they didn't quite understand or were finding difficult in coping with when emotions were heightened. So I think anything we can do to bring that transparency and communication, especially when things are difficult, would be really useful. So in terms of a conclusion, as many as 60 families or fostering households interviewed say they could have been retained by their service. we've spoken to a percentage of foster carers leaving around half of our local authority services and just a few of our independents in Wales. So when you extrapolate that as a Wales-wide picture, does this mean that there are many more? We know there are 300 foster carers needed in Wales right now to meet the needs of children and young people. This number does make a significant difference to that target. A break or a pause can have changed the outcome. So can we collectively be solution focused and work out how to address that and what are the barriers to that happening? Through my work at the Fostering Network, I personally know two fostering families who have needed that break, asked for it and been given it. And then they've returned after the break and taken another placement and gone on to foster more children. So it does happen, but it does seem that that's not universally available. And finally, I think the focus groups have picked up many examples of good practice, which are all included in the report, about the importance of face-to-face engagement and creating a community of support. Reading these findings, that does seem like a really essential consideration. How do we create that community of support for everybody across Wales? So at the Foster Network, we really want to make sure that we're working with you to do that. So I'm going to end this section by thanking all the participants who took part in an interview. It was, it was really fantastic that we were able to collect all this data and they shared some really difficult experiences with us. So we definitely want to extend our thanks to them. And I'm going to stop sharing soon if I can work out how to do that. Yes, I can, I think. Hopefully that's what I've done. And I'm going to invite Jasmine now to share some of her reflections with us. So Jasmine Thorne, who works within our team here in Wales, she's a qualified counsellor and an experienced mediator and advocate. And that's really important because Jasmine spoke to some people who retold some of the most stressful things that had ever happened to them, whether that was the actual ending of fostering itself or the other things that were going on for them that led to them stopping. So I think it's really important that we brought in someone with those skills. This wasn't just someone at the office doing some interviews. It was someone who was really trained and had the listening skills to be able to do this. So it's going to be really interesting to hear a bit more from Jasmine about what that experience was like. So Jasmine, to start off with, what was your experience of carrying out these interviews, and what would you say is the main thing you've learned about the foster carers you spoke to along the way?
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and hi everybody. So I'd say it's been an amazing experience to, and I still continuing to speak to carers, but to speak to 112 carers and get their experiences. The hardest part I would say is actually getting the carers, pinpointing them, and actually getting the interview booked in. Many carers would say, "Oh, how long will it take?" And I'd say, "Well, we can probably do it in about 15, 20 minutes." And I would say probably the majority of people I've spoken to, we were on the phone for about an hour. Or if we did it on Teams. So I think the process has been really beneficial for the carers. It's allowed them to have that space to share their experiences and share their stories. And I think for me, the main thing that I've learned, I mean, we already know the foster carers are amazing people, to open their homes and open their lives. And the carers that I've spoken to, even if it haven't ended the best way, have said fostering has been life-changing for me and my family, even though we had many highs, many lows, but it's life-changing, to see those benefits with the young people. The carers remained very focused on the children and young people, and it was never about them. It was about the processes. It was about maybe the barriers that were there. They knew that there are restraints, they know there are limitations, even with services, they know social workers are carrying really heavy loads as well. So they were really empathetic to all that, and it was never about the children or the young people. And many of them still continue to have relationships with the young people they looked after. Lots of them have already got their birth children, and they become extended family. So it's been great. And as you said, it's been difficult because some of them had to end. Maybe as you said in the presentation, is ill health, caring for relatives. And I think lots of carers say, to do this role, you've got to give 110%. And if you can't give 110%, you shouldn't really be doing it, because the children need everything. So, and that was really hard for some carers to give it up for other reasons. But no, I've really enjoyed it.
That's great. Thank you, Jasmine. I think that's so interesting to hear about the fact that, yeah, and I can attest to this having read through the transcripts. this was never about the children. We didn't see lots about, oh, it's just too difficult to care for them. It was a systems thing in almost all,
Mm,
wasn't it? And so that's really interesting. I think the fact that 80% say they would recommend fostering really bears that out, is that they
yeah.
remain committed to children and see it as a worthwhile thing to do as a family. So that's really good. What do you
Mm.
think was the benefit from the way the interview was formatted? And I know you asked a lot of questions. People can see in the report that all the questions are listed at the end, and actually not all of the answers appear in the report. It would be 200 pages long. So, but you did ask a lot of questions. So what do you think was that benefit of going right through their fostering journey?
I think the way we formatted that was really beneficial, because it didn't just focus on specifics, what worked well, what didn't work well. We captured the whole fostering journey, from what motivated them to start fostering. So it gave them a real reflective process and time with me. And as I said, most carers were never in a hurry to get off the phone once we were on there. They really enjoyed talking about their experience. Some even saying, this is really therapeutic. This feels like a counselling session. So thank you. Because some of them have not spoken to anybody since leaving fostering, which left some of them just with that, not having that closure. So I think
Mm.
it was really beneficial, because we looked at lots of, as you said, asked lots of questions, what worked well, what could be improved on. But I think it gave them that time to reflect on their fostering journeys. And as you said, there were some difficult times, and but there were lots of positive times as well. And I think as carers were going through that, they, and were able that and they were able to come to a natural closure with that as well. And I think that was really beneficial for them, especially for the ones that's not been able to, if circumstances meant the children had moved out, then their fostering career ended. It was always a gap, and it was still there for them. So I think it was quite therapeutic for a lot of the carers I spoke to.
Yeah, and I think definitely that thing of looking at the whole journey and allowing them to reflect. We know that it's something people find quite difficult to talk to their
Mm,
friends and family or outside of that fostering. People don't always understand the nature of what they're doing. So I think, yeah, having that opportunity to
mm,
talk to someone who really understands what they've been doing and what they've been through, really useful. We've talked about, I've used the word data a lot here and stats and this charts, but what you've really collated and collected here are 112 narratives and real life experiences. And we found through this process, it's been really difficult to get to this stage.
mm,
We found there are lots and lots of things that don't fit into a chart or a graph.
mm.
So I wondered if you could talk a bit about any of the stories or patterns that don't fit neatly into that data collection, but have really resonated with you as you've been talking to people.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there was some that springs out. And I know Matching, I remember having an interview with, they were newly qualified carers. It was their first placement, and we actually did a Teams call, so you could actually see them as well. And they were really looking forward to going through it, because they hadn't spoken to anyone, and they were devastated. Felt like they really let the child down because it came to an end. But when we actually broke it down and we were talking about it, it was Matching. They placed a child somewhere where there was lots of animals. The child didn't like animals. They only had a bath, and the child only liked the shower. So it was never going to work. So I think just supporting carers through that journey, and I think as well other carers. And again, just listening to some of the stories and some of the challenges that the carers go and above and beyond. I spoke to some carers that were doing transitioning with young people while going through their own family bereavements, or really challenging times, or the adoption process, and they were doing everything to make this happen. And then there was a couple that definitely spring to mind that then had a finance bill saying, oh, we've overpaid you. And then the carers are like, oh, I'm done now. So it's those kind of things where they're struggling, and then that final little thing that just goes, oh, that's that's it for me now. And there was definitely some carers whose, for whatever reasons, there might have been a change of social worker, a change of the child social worker, relationships got a little bit fragile. And the carers were very quick to say, all right, that's it, I'm out, I'm leaving, and they'd handing you notice. So there was definitely some carers that said, I acted too hastily on reflection. Um, I should have waited. My emotions are really high, and now they've had that time. They kind of regretting their decision. and actually miss
That's so
fostering.
interesting. Yeah, I think that's something I remember talking to you so much over this process, that that feeling of them saying, I don't think this was what I wanted, but it's all happened now and it had happened so quickly. And again, coming back to that pause, but also what you said about receiving that letter about overpayment, now you owe us money, when they're given everything and feel like they're going above and beyond. People in the office have sent that letter in the back, they're doing their jobs, they're doing what they need to do, but without maybe not understanding the impact of what
Yeah,
that'll mean emotionally. So I think there's that mismatch sometimes, isn't it, between a system and then
yeah.
people who are experiencing very real life things. So I think that was definitely something that came across a lot. So final question then for you, Jasmine. What are your reflections on the importance of sort of trust building, but then also the value of independence in carrying out these types of interview? Do you think that was really beneficial in terms of really getting that understanding of why they'd stopped their fostering journey?
Yeah, I think, you know, and again, I spoke to lots of carers, and, you know, some had already done their own exit interviews as well with their own service. So some were very vocal and said, well, I've told them this and I'm happy to tell them again. So, you know, they were very vocal. But I think there were others that were happy, and they were confident because it was confidential and that it wouldn't be collated, sorry, that it wouldn't be shared, you know, and it would be anonymised. You know, we're very happy to take part in that, the questionnaire. Because again, some carers felt really loyal to their service and didn't actually want to say anything negative. So if there had been some things, they were kind of like, oh, you know, but I think knowing that it is anonymised, and it's, you know, it's all, this is all aimed, isn't it, to make fostering better, and you know, with, and as I said, it's not all negative. They were really good positives and really good evidence of
Mm.
good practice, and you know, so it's about actually let's learn from that and share that with others as well, and
Yeah.
share those positive experiences. But I do think, the process was really important for some carers. As I said, some of them hadn't spoken to anyone since their fostering career ended. So I think it was a really good process for them to have their say, share their experiences, and it gives them closure.
Mm.
So I think it was valuable.
Thanks, Jasmine. That's so interesting. I think one question that we just had from the chat, which actually it'd be interesting to pick up now, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but it'd be useful to see what you think, Jasmine. Someone's asked, was there any mention about finances ever and being a reason why foster care has moved on? I don't really remember seeing that, and you'll notice it's not in the report at all because it wasn't one of those top reasons. We obviously had that thing about feeling more valued, but again, when you break that down, none of the quotes put a financial value on that. It's a lot to do with those relationships and interpersonal things. That was definitely, I don't ever remember seeing, and that's, it's not in the report because it wasn't a bank of data asking for
Mm,
financial. And as an organization, as you'll all know, if you see it, we are always calling for higher allowances and fees for foster carers, but actually that isn't something that's come out here. Would you say that's right, Jasmine? I don't remember
yeah,
seeing anything.
I definitely don't think, there was any interviews with Kira I left because of the finances. You know, that certainly was never brought up. That wasn't one of the reasons that was shared with myself. You know, finances were discussed in the fact that, you know, when you break it down, they were caring 24 hours, 7 days a week, and we have to pay for this. That would have come up, but it was never a factor maybe with leaving. And I do remember some short breaks or respite carers were actually saying they were out of pocket by providing the short breaks, because obviously they were going out doing fun stuff, so when they broke it, but again, that wasn't the reason why they left. As I said, Liz, throughout this, they go into fostering because they want to look after young people and they want to care for young people, and that was evident and clear through the interviews with them.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Jasmine. So just a reminder, if you've got any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box or in the chat. We can see that. So we'll come
Mm.
back to those after the next section, because now we're going to hear from Carla Perry. So Carla is a fostering team manager at Caerphilly. Carla's service has referred foster carers to this project and also took part in the focus groups earlier this year. Alongside that, Carla's given us really great input along the way. It's really helped us understand how services were responding to what we were proposing and what information we need to be sharing at each stage. So that's why we were really keen to have her join us today. So Carla's read the report in advance of this session, and now we're going to hear what she thinks. So thank you, Carla, for joining us. If you want to pop yourself off mute, and I will ask you your first question. So basically, what is your reaction to the findings of this report as a service manager? What are your reactions?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me along, and thank you to our foster carers as well for being part of this. In terms of my first reaction, you put it really well that you know, this is a person's narrative, an account of a series of related events or experiences that's been perceived. And, you know, what one thing may feel like for another, what one thing may feel like for some person may not have been the same sort of reaction or perceived sort of reaction for another person. And for me, I suppose that following the exit interviews, I think we need to think about how we take this data and look at our own breakdown report, so to speak, within our own fostering services involved. But I'm also mindful some reasons provided could be outside of the influence of the fostering service. However, for me, the report really highlighted the significant challenges in foster carer retention and satisfaction. And the findings showed that a high proportion of carers left within the first 5 years, with many citing a lack of support and issues around placement matching. And for me, the early years of fostering appear to be particularly high risk for dropouts, highlighting the need for structured induction, mentoring and support. And another thing that really struck me is that when I was reading the report, it kind of came across sometimes that we do not or don't always create a culture of value and respect, one team around the child. And, you know, I just do question how, I suppose, we're all working transparently and listening to each other and taking some points from each other and learning from those things. So they're the main things that struck me initially.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. Do you think that resonates with your own experiences as a foster manager and sort of the challenges that you're experiencing as a team at the moment? Did you think those were things you could already see within your service, or was it quite surprising?
Well, the first part in terms of retention and turnover, the fact that it's been drawn out that I think we said 30% of losing foster carers within the first 3 years highlights for me a critical period, not undermining obviously foster carers who've cared for 5 years plus and so on, but that period really struck a chord for me whereby they're most vulnerable to leaving. And then it made me think about the times like 5 years ago when we had COVID, we continued to assess and support virtually. But also the information gathered suggests that induction, again, training and early support systems are possibly not strong enough. And for me also, the lack of support as a primary driver, it's identified for me that the cornerstone really of foster carers' satisfaction and resilience. And if nearly half of carers leave due to the perceived lack of support, then this, for me, looking in, signals either the support is not so sufficient or maybe inconsistent. We've got that underlying message that carers are saying that they don't feel their needs are being heard or met, or maybe there's a gap between what services think we're providing and what carers are actually experiencing. So I think that's something we need to really think about there and learn from. Also, over half of the respondents believe that the service could have done something differently to keep them in fostering. So I think that's both concerning and encouraging, because it shows many carers don't leave because fostering wasn't right for them. So if they felt unsupported, for example, or poorly matched, there is a possibility there that retention is just not possible, but also achievable. So I think if we invest in the right areas and really listen to what's being said, you know, there could be a good result, a better result. So for me, carers who feel mismatched, I also feel that some carers may lose confidence or feel that they're being set up to fail. So that also highlights a need for maybe better assessment of matching, skills, preferences, capacity, obviously the improved communication, but also the need for more transparent and collaborative decision making when matching children. And I know that's hard because it's really tough at the moment, isn't it? We don't always have, should we say, that matching preference or even matching. So I'd be interested to hear from others about what they thought about that, really.
Yeah. That's so useful. I think, yeah, we could see that, some people definitely said that, we don't think there was matching. We took a child because they needed somewhere to go, and that, they were recognizing that. But I think you're so right that we saw a lot of potential here, that this was a group of people where a significant number of them could have been retained, which means it's not that people are being assessed and approved who should never have been foster carers necessarily. It's just that something additional was needed to help them, and something that is real, a light bulb moment. Then I sort of think we've not really, I mean, there's no way we could have looked into this as a report, but the fact that when we're looking at those 5 years, it's been a very significant 5 years since 2020. So yeah, we know that through that, some people might have just been coming into fostering at the point where lockdowns happened or approved during lockdowns. We all moved online. We as a net, as the Foster Network, we do stuff online now that used to be in person. So we're as much part of this. We would have been running sessions, bringing people together in nice conference spaces with the tea and coffee. We've stuck to doing a lot of that online. So I think, all of us as a sector have really kept some of those approaches because it's very convenient, it's cost effective. For some people, it actually is easier for them because they can just join from home and then carry on what we're doing. But we've probably lost something there along the way. So I think that's definitely something to consider, isn't it? About whether we have provided that wraparound support given the changes that have happened. I think that's really an interesting thing to think of. We're getting quite a lot of things in the chat actually. So I'm gonna ask you the last question, and then we'll come to the chat and maybe have a read through it. So do you have any initial thoughts on actions that you might take as a result of reading the report, or sort of share any practice recommendations that you've already talked about as a result of the focus group?
Yes. So from my perspective, the three main areas of focus for me was embedding a culture of support. So ensuring that there's regular, meaningful supervision, responsive out of hours support. And I'm mindful we can only do what we can do within out of hours. But also, I think the recognition of emotional toil that fostering takes. I've already touched upon the strengthening of that early years post-approval support with targeted training, mentoring, and peer networks. And you've already mentioned the Mockingbird programme. And also, we need to think about improving placement matching processes, ensuring that carers are also involved, and feel confident in the suitability of children placed with them. And I'm mindful that we can address these areas and we can talk about these areas and try our best with the collaboration of foster carers to improve this. But we do need to improve placement stability and support. And ultimately, this is to create better outcomes for our children. But I really do feel passionate about not just developing a regional, but a Foster Wales retention strategy that specifically targets the first 3 years of fostering. And that would be the first thing for me that I would be taking away from that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carla. We've got some comments on the chat, so I'll just read those through for everyone. So Alistair Cope from Foster Wales, hi Alistair, says we're on the cusp of launching our framework for the first year in fostering and making sure newly approved carers get the right support. So tapping into things like fostering wellbeing, using the pioneers. So he says there's a really useful point from Carla to show how important it is. And I think, yeah, we can definitely see that something like that is needed, having seen the findings for this report. And Roz says as well, I echo what Carla says, there's so much pressure to place when there is a vacancy. Where there is a vacancy, if you had lots of choices of carers, you would truly be able to make that match. And obviously we sort of recognised that in this session today. Ben has just asked, interested to hear your thoughts on how this report can be used to encourage more people into fostering. Appreciate why this is about why fostering ends, but do you think highlighting options such as breaks in the ongoing support would encourage more referrals? I think it would, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear what Carla thinks as well. I suppose what we've done here is really looked at it from a retention lens. We did have a discussion about could we also use this data to think about recruitment, and we've looked at why people came into fostering and things like that. But I suppose the thing is we know from this report that those things aren't happening consistently. So we're probably a little while away from saying that, you know, you'll get short breaks, you'll get all this support. We can see here that for some people that hasn't worked, but I suppose we know now from this what are the things people place the most value on. And I think that's really useful. I think what Carla said is really, like, sometimes are we doing what we think they need or what they think they need? And they've told us really clearly here there were support needs that they didn't feel were met. So I suppose we can see what people's priorities were. It wasn't necessarily the finances, it was the children and young people where they were asking for short breaks. They wanted those managed and well planned and not with strangers. So they've got that focus on the children and young people, but also on managing their own emotional well-being. So we can really see that as a benefit. And I think, you know, we've clearly seen that that's maybe where support work should be focused. Is there anything you think, Carla, in terms of recruitment? It's sort of a different way of looking at it, really.
I think word of mouth has always been powerful, isn't it?
Mm.
And if you're part of a family, a fostering family, a fostering support, then you're gonna be talking about positively what it's like to be a foster carer. You're going to be talking positively about what the support structures look like and how you feel constantly heard and supported. And then you're going to be expanding that to respite opportunities, maybe peer supports, groups, and also strengthening that early intervention and communication. And I think if we know that now, we've got a blueprint on how to improve on that and to make things better and to really improve our collaboration work, because we are one team at the end of the day. And that's how I see it.
Yeah. No, I think there's lots in the report about that importance of a team approach and consistency across Wales, which we know, you know, isn't always the case at the moment, and that's for lots of reasons. But I think there was clearly them wanting that consistency and not finding it. So I think anything we can do sort of together, and we feel very much as an organisation we want to support with that. So thanks so much, Carla. That's so interesting, because I'd not spoken to Carla before today about her thoughts on purpose, really. Jasmine spoke to her because I just wanted to hear as you were describing it, but it's really good to know that the work we've done is useful and that it's something that we can all now look at and plan going forward, because obviously that's why we do this. We don't want to just put these reports out there for them to sit on a shelf. So I think that's really good to hear that there is some very useful things we can take from this. So we've still got time for some questions if anyone wants to ask anything. So people are doing that in the chat mainly. There's nothing in the question box. So if you want to add anything to the chat, we've just got 5 or 10 minutes left to do that. While we're just waiting to see if anyone asks any more questions, I can share some information on our next steps. So the report's now available on our website for you to look at. We'll send out a link following this session. We want to keep talking about the findings. We're really keen to hear from you in terms of what you think of what we've discovered and what we've reported on, what you think of our recommendations, whether there are specific things you think we as an organisation should be doing with them. I'm really keen to hear about that. We're going to look at what we deliver and how we can enhance our support for foster carers. And this feedback combined with what we learned in the State of the Nation report, which came out earlier this year, and there is a lot of similarities between those two things. It's really highlighted that need for additional wraparound support for carers. So we have our helpline service, which is a point of contact people can phone. We're looking at whether we can build in some additional support to that for those carers who are experiencing difficulties that don't meet that threshold for independent support, but maybe they need a little bit more time to unpick some of these things they're experiencing. So we're looking at whether we can develop an advocacy offer that's built into that. So we saw so much in these interviews about people who just were confused about what they needed to do, and they would go into meetings they didn't feel prepared for, felt a bit sidelined. Communication had maybe broken down. If we can use some advocacy time to support with that, that'll be really useful. Jasmine's still conducting exit interviews. So when we did the focus groups, we looked at the questions and the reporting and what we collected and all of our learning from the analysis we've done so far, and we streamlined the questions. It was a real journey to analyze this, because we had 112 very personal stories, and pulling data out of that was really quite challenging. So we've streamlined that, and a third year report will come out next year, which will just be a slightly more condensed version of what we've done this time. So you can still refer carers to us, even if you haven't before. Any services that haven't, they can join at any time. And then we're really interested in working with services to find out then what's the future of what exit interviews could be. So that project's in place till the end of March 2026, but what do we do after that? We've heard from Jasmine about what she thinks was a real benefit in having that independent voice. And so that's something that we want to look at in more detail. One idea, and this is very much an idea at this stage, but would it be useful that we offer an independent exit interview? So not the anonymized one that feeds into research as we're doing now, but an anonymous, and a non-anonymous, that's what's the word for that? I don't know. But an exit interview where we meet with the foster carer and provide a short report back to the service. So they have that opportunity to speak to someone independent, and then we can feed that back as a short report. That's just an idea of something we could do. But we'd be keen to hear from you on what's useful. So that's everything we've sort of got planned. To say we'd really like that dialogue to carry on. Tell us what you think. We've got another question coming in. Were there any statistics gathered about how many foster carers left due to poor handling of allegations and how it left foster carers feeling? I think allegations is touched upon, Jasmine. You will see it wasn't broken down as a specific reason within that chart. So it wasn't that there was a significant number who said an allegation and I left, but some of the support issues surrounding that were linked to support during, before, after an allegation. Do you think that sounds about right, Jasmine?
Yeah. Definitely. It's more about the relationship afterwards, the time carers have had to wait, and lack of communication. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think some of those overarching points about support, communication applied to that, but also they applied to many other things that weren't allegations related. So I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't on its own. It wasn't a reason it was an allegation and then I left. It was more the handling of it. So I think, yeah, you'll see that represented a bit more in the report, but it wasn't on its own a significant factor. Do we have any more questions? And if not, I will wrap up. It's always hard when we can't see you, but I think it has been quite useful to have this format today. Nothing else has come through, so I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you so much for everyone that's joined us. I hope that's been useful. It's definitely been, it's a real milestone for us to get to the point where we're reporting back. We've been doing this for a long time. There's been a lot of voices saying, when are you going to tell us something? And I say in many ways that's because it was a tricky one. Something Roz asked, sorry, I did see this question, Roz, and I skipped over it. How long did carers take a break? I think your question was how long would a break need to be? I don't think we've got that as a definite recommendation because it was very different. People were asking for a break or a pause for many different reasons, personal burnout, but also sometimes a specific family reason. So it's obviously going to be quite specific for them. What they found was they weren't really allowed to wait very long before there was pressure for a placement. So I think what we'd be saying in the recommendation is flexibility and listening to them and finding out what they need and then managing that. And it may be that, obviously you can't have people who are approved for 12, 18, 24 months and never foster anyone. We do understand that. But actually it's about understanding what's been asked for and do they need to go back to panel as a result of that. And some of them felt that process happened very quickly. Conversations about, well, are you taking anyone or not? They felt that was pressure. And if they said, well, I've told you I can't right now, right panel, and you're gone, and then they were a bit confused as to why that had happened. So I don't think we have a clear recommendation on it needs to be X amount of months, but it's more about the flexibility and as we've called the report, listening to foster carers about what they're asking for and what they're able to do. And we always felt, Jasmine, didn't we, right from the start of doing this, there was some flexibility there. And if they're saying, like, I couldn't do a full-time placement of a child or children in my house right now, it doesn't mean they're done with fostering. Like, are there other ways? Could they be the wraparound support for someone else? Could they be providing that short break or even an evening? Could they be there for an evening or a school pickup to allow somebody else who's experiencing a bit of burnout to have some time where they have a break? So we felt it was piecing that together. There were people saying, I could have just done a short break, but that wasn't offered. I was told you're fostering, you're either doing it or you're not. And then people asking for short breaks. So I think there's definitely something there about just listening and thinking more holistically about the needs of the foster carers as a whole. She just said someone's asked. Thank you for the questions. Oh, and yeah, we've got someone joining us from Northern Ireland today as well, from a trust who's working on retention over this. That's really interesting. And we are going to share this report UK-wide because we are a UK organisation. So we're hoping it'll be useful learning across the board, really, and to support a lot of work that's been done on retention in other areas as well. So again, thank you so much to everybody who has referred carers into us. We couldn't have done this if you hadn't seen the value and been really proactive in getting involved and challenged us on what we were doing and was it the right thing. I've had some really useful conversations with people about why are we doing this, and there was a bit of suspicion, you know, are we checking up? Has someone asked us to do this because we're checking up for people? It never was that. It was about getting us to this point. So I hope you can see now that this is what we were sort of aiming for and that it has been useful. Thank you again to Jasmine for just being a real beacon of light, I'm sure, for some of these people when you said they hadn't talked to anybody. And I think that time with you will have really made a difference. So thank you so much. And thank you to Carla for sharing your thoughts today. And she's not with us now because Tamsin actually left the organisation earlier, at the end of last month, actually, because she's training to be a primary school teacher. But Tamsin Cavell, who learnt to code and then coded up all of these long, complicated stories of people's lives and managed to turn them into a more academic analysis, which was a real undertaking. And I was very, very proud when we finally got to a point that we had something. So Tamsin's not with us now, but thank you also to her. So thanks everyone again for joining us, and keep in touch. If there's anything you want more information on, we'd love to hear from you. But thanks very much, everyone.